There were 3 massive shipping containers blocking my driveway. Not just parked nearby, no, these steel beasts were wedged across the entire width of my property like a barricade in a war zone. Bright orange, dented, ugly, and humming faintly from the summer heat, they loomed like some industrial fortress. I couldn't even get my truck out, let alone walk through without climbing over. And right in the middle of this mess, leaning against one of them like she had just conquered Rome, stood Karen, the HOA president, with her arms crossed and a smirk on her face that made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. "You think you can just ignore HOA guidelines?" she shouted across my lawn, her voice sharp enough to slice glass. "Well, let's see you ignore this." My neighbor across the street peeked from behind her curtain. 2 others stood on the sidewalk, pretending to water their plants, but I knew they were watching every second. Karen didn't care who was listening. She wanted the whole neighborhood to see her little stunt. I didn't yell back. I didn't even frown. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, looking at her like she was a raccoon that had wandered into the wrong backyard. She thought this was the final blow in our little dispute. She thought she'd boxed me in, made my life impossible. She didn't know, not yet, that I was the one holding the real cards. She didn't know that every inch of land she strutted across, every home on this street, every HOA rule she barked out, all of it was under a lease signed with me. And when I told her who her landlord really was, well, let's just say I'd never seen someone's face change colors so fast. But that's getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how we even got here, because it wasn't always this way. This started long before the shipping containers rolled in like an invading army. It began on a soft spring morning a few months back. I had just finished fixing the fence along the side yard when I saw Karen marching up my driveway. She didn't knock. She didn't say, hello. She didn't even look around to admire the flower beds my late wife had planted years ago. She just slammed a stack of papers into my hand. "This is your 3rd violation notice," she said. "Your driveway doesn't meet the approved surface guidelines. You have 30 days to replace it." I glanced at the papers, more confused than upset. "What's wrong with my driveway?" I asked. "It's asphalt," she replied like the word itself was offensive. "HOA standards require concrete. That black surface is lowering neighborhood property values." I almost laughed. My driveway was perfectly fine, sealed every year, smooth, no cracks. It wasn't some broken, jagged mess. Asphalt just happened to be what I'd installed 20 years ago. I'd raised kids here, hosted neighborhood barbecues, even cleared snow for half the block when storms rolled in. Now suddenly, my driveway was a problem? "I'm not tearing up a perfectly good driveway," I told her. Karen leaned in slightly, lowering her voice but raising the venom. "Then you'll be fined. Every week. Until you comply." She spun on her heel and strutted off without giving me another word. At first, I brushed it off. The HOA had sent dumb notices before. My grass was too tall once, even though it was barely an inch over. Usually, I ignored them and they gave up. But this time was different. This time, the fines started rolling in. Week 1, $100. Week 2, $200. Week 3, $300. It wasn't about money for me, I could afford it. But the principle of the thing burned me alive inside. It wasn't about aesthetics. It wasn't about property values. It was about control. Karen liked to make examples out of people. And the truth is, most folks in the neighborhood just gave in because they didn't want the headache. But I wasn't most folks. A month later, I got a call from an old friend, Daniel, who managed one of my rental properties in town. He told me something that stopped me cold. "Hey, did you know the HOA board renewed the land lease this year?" he said casually. "Saw your name on the paperwork when I was handling the taxes." At first, I thought he was mistaken. Then I dug through my own records. And there it was. A legal agreement stating the entire HOA's residential area sat on a parcel of land I'd inherited from my uncle years ago. I had always assumed it was just a small wooded area on the outskirts. But no, turns out, the original developer never bought the land outright. They leased it, from my uncle. When he passed, I kept the deed without paying much attention to it. For all these years, the HOA had been making their rules, running their meetings, and patting themselves on the back, without realizing they were tenants on my property. I could have dropped the hammer right then and there. But I didn't. I wanted to see just how far Karen would go. By midsummer, she had sent me 6 more violation notices and doubled my fines. Then came the day she stood outside with her board members, loudly discussing more serious measures to deal with my non-compliance. 2 weeks later, those serious measures arrived. At 6 in the morning, I was woken by the deep rumble of diesel engines. I peeked through the blinds and saw 2 semi-trucks pulling up, each carrying a 40-foot shipping container. By the time I got outside, the drivers were already lowering them onto my driveway, side by side, completely blocking it off. Karen was directing them like a movie director on set, pointing, waving, and smiling as neighbors gathered to watch. She even clapped her hands when the last one thudded into place. "Now you won't be using this driveway until you fix it," she said, her voice dripping with smugness. I stood there, calm as a summer lake, even though inside, my patience was hanging by a thread. She thought this was war. She thought she had the upper hand. But I was about to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. Because if she thought she was playing chess, she didn't realize I was the one who built the board. And when I made my move, everything would change. Karen thought her grand shipping container stunt would break me. She strutted around like a general after a victory, greeting every neighbor who came by to gawk at her solution to my driveway problem. Kids on bikes slowed down to stare, parents whispered to each other, and Karen just soaked it in like she was queen of the cul-de-sac. She even had the nerve to call out to me that evening while I was on my porch. "You can still walk to the street, you know," she said with mock sweetness. "Might be good exercise for you since your truck isn't going anywhere." Then she laughed at her own joke. That laugh was the kind of thing you hear right before a person finds out they've made a terrible mistake. But I didn't bite back. Not yet. I let her bask in her moment because patience is a weapon most people forget exists. I spent the next 2 days doing nothing about the containers, not calling the city, not calling the police, not even trying to move them. I let her think she had won. Meanwhile, I started making a few quiet phone calls. First to my attorney, then to a property manager who owed me a favor. I didn't even mention the containers yet, I just asked for updated lease terms, copies of payment records, and the HOA's renewal paperwork. By the time I hung up, I had enough ammunition to level Karen's little empire twice over. But before I dropped the truth on her, I wanted her to push just a little bit further. I wanted the whole neighborhood to see how far she would go when she thought she had power. That chance came sooner than I expected. 3 days after the blockade went up, I came home from a trip into town to find a bright yellow sticker slapped across my front door. HOA final notice, imminent foreclosure for non-compliance, in big block letters. I actually laughed out loud. Foreclosure? On a house that wasn't even part of their ownership structure? On land that I owned outright? It was so absurd that for a moment, I wondered if this was some elaborate prank. But no, this was Karen, burning every bridge she had left just to win some petty fight about asphalt. I pulled the notice off, walked into my kitchen, and poured myself a coffee. I didn't feel anger. I felt something better, anticipation. Because if she thought blocking my driveway was bold, I was about to redefine the word for her. The very next morning, I walked into the HOA's monthly meeting. No invitation, no warning, just opened the door and stepped in like I belonged there. Karen froze mid-sentence when she saw me, her smile vanishing like someone had pulled a plug. "Sir, this is a private meeting for board members only," she said sharply. "Good thing I'm the only person here who actually owns the ground you're sitting on," I replied calmly. The silence in that room was heavy enough to crush a man. Board members glanced at each other, unsure if they'd heard me right. Karen's face went pale, then red, then something between the two. I placed a folder on the table, slow and deliberate, and opened it to the first page, the lease agreement signed by her and every member of that board. The one with my name listed as the lessor. "You've been tenants on my property for the last 20 years, I said. "And after the little stunt with the shipping containers, I'm thinking it might be time to reevaluate our arrangement." Karen opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I didn't need to say more. I closed the folder, tucked it under my arm, and left the room without waiting for a response. That was the less extreme part of my plan. The extreme part happened later that night. Just before midnight, I walked outside with a flashlight and a wrench. The neighborhood was quiet, every porch dark. I crossed my lawn, ducked under the edge of the first shipping container, and found the locking pins holding it to the metal braces. One by one, I loosened them until the container sat loose on its supports. Then I stepped back and made a single phone call. 15 minutes later, headlights rolled down the street, big, bright, and attached to a tow truck that looked like it could haul a train car. My buddy Tom stepped out, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Where you want, Em?" he asked. I pointed toward Karen's house without hesitation. We hooked the chains, cranked the lift, and within minutes, the first container was gone from my driveway. By the time we were done, all three were stacked neatly in her front yard, blocking her driveway and her front door. And because I'm not without a sense of humor, I left a sign taped to the top one. "Return to sender." By sunrise, half the neighborhood was outside taking pictures. Karen? She was trapped inside, staring out her window with a face that could curdle milk. She had declared war. I had just fired the first real shot. The neighborhood hadn't been that alive in years. By the time the sun was fully up, folks were gathered in little clusters on the sidewalk, whispering, pointing, laughing. Some tried to be discreet, but the sound of camera shutters and muffled chuckles made it obvious everyone was enjoying the sight of 3 giant shipping containers stacked like a fortress around Karen's front door. Her prized rose bushes? Hidden. Her shiny SUV? Trapped in the driveway. Her morning power walk? Cancelled. And the best part? She couldn't do a thing without admitting she had no legal right to put them on my property in the first place. From my porch, I could see her pacing back and forth behind the curtains like a caged tiger. At one point, she yanked open the front door, stared at the towering steel wall, then slammed it shut so hard the windows rattled. It should have been enough to teach her a lesson. But Karen wasn't the type to quit. No, she was the kind who would set herself on fire just to keep you from warming your hands. That afternoon, I was working in my garage when I heard tires screech outside. I stepped out to see a black pickup truck backing into my driveway, well, almost into my driveway. The containers were gone now, but in their place, Karen had arranged a row of bright orange traffic barrels, each one plastered with HOA violation stickers. "You can't block my driveway," I called out. "This is temporary safety equipment," she yelled back, reading from what looked like a printout of some obscure municipal code. "Until you replace that illegal asphalt, we're restricting access for safety reasons." I just stared at her. It wasn't even about the driveway anymore. She just wanted me to submit. But here's the thing, when you own the ground under someone's feet, you don't have to play their game. You are the game. I calmly walked over, picked up one of the barrels, and rolled it right back into the street. The look on her face could have soured fresh milk. "You can't just," she started, but I cut her off. "I can do whatever I want, Karen. Remember that." I left her standing there, fuming, while I went back to my garage. I figured that might be the end of it for the day. It wasn't. By evening, she had escalated again. I came out to check the mail and found a brand new notice posted, not just on my door, but on nearly every house in the neighborhood. In bold letters, it read, "Mandatory Driveway Renovation Project, Special Assessment Fee $2,500 PR Household." She had actually pushed through a vote among the HOA board to force everyone to repave their driveways to match her aesthetic standard. It was her way of turning the whole neighborhood against me, making it look like I was costing them money. That was the less extreme event of the day. The extreme part came right after dinner. I was sitting in my living room, watching an old Clint Eastwood movie, when I heard shouting outside. At first, I thought it was just more of the usual bickering between neighbors. But when I stepped onto the porch, I saw blue and red lights flashing down the street. 2 police cruisers were parked in front of my house, and Karen was standing between them, pointing straight at me. "That's him," she shouted. "He stole my property. Those containers are mine, and he trespassed to move them." The officers approached, their expressions serious but cautious. "Sir, we got a call about some property damage and unauthorized removal," one of them said. Karen was grinning like she'd already won. "Arrest him," she demanded. "He's dangerous. He threatened me." I didn't say a word. I just walked inside, came back out with my folder, and handed it to the officer. Inside were copies of the lease agreement, property records, and, just for fun, a photo of Karen directing the placement of those same containers on my driveway. The officer flipped through the pages, looked at Karen, and said, "Ma'am, we're going to have to advise you this is a civil matter, not criminal. And from what I see here, you may actually be in violation yourself." The smile slid right off her face. The cops left without another word to me, but the neighborhood saw it all. Every pair of eyes behind every curtain now knew the HOA president had just tried, and failed, to have me arrested. Karen thought she'd humiliate me in front of the block. Instead, she just pulled the pin on the grenade. The next morning, the air in the neighborhood felt different. Not just tense, charged. People weren't pretending not to watch anymore. They were out in the open, sitting on porches, leaning on fences, pretending to sip coffee while their eyes stayed locked on my house and Karen's. Word had spread fast about the police visit. Some neighbors looked curious, some looked worried, but more than a few had this quiet, satisfied smirk like they'd been waiting years to see someone stand up to Karen. She didn't show her face all morning. Her curtains stayed drawn, her driveway still blocked by those traffic barrels. But around noon, I heard the telltale sound of her voice echoing from the HOA office, 3 blocks over. I decided to take a walk and see just how much trouble she was cooking up. When I got there, the door was propped open, and her voice was sharp enough to slice through the summer heat. "He's undermining the HOA's authority. If we let him get away with this, what's next? People painting their houses neon green? Chickens running loose?" One of the board members mumbled something I couldn't hear, but it made Karen snap. "I don't care if he owns the land. We control the neighborhood." I almost laughed out loud. She still didn't get it. She thought this was a turf war. But I wasn't fighting over turf. I was the turf. I walked away before she noticed me, already making calls on the way home. This time I didn't just reach out to my lawyer, I called the lease accountant, the property surveyor, and the local paper. If Karen wanted this to be public, I was happy to help her along. The less extreme part happened that afternoon. A group of neighbors knocked on my door, led by a guy named Ben who lived 2 streets over. He'd been in the neighborhood for 15 years, and I'd seen him do everything from mow lawns for elderly residents to fix broken fences without charging a dime. "We heard what happened with the cops," Ben said. "And about the land thing. Is it true?" I didn't lie. "Every inch of this development sits on a lease with me. Always has." His eyes widened, and a few people behind him exchanged shocked looks. "Then why do you even bother with their rules?" one woman asked. "Because I don't want to be a tyrant," I said honestly. "I believe in people having their space." "But Karen doesn't see it that way." Ben nodded slowly, and I could see the shift in their expressions, distrust of the HOA turning into something like loyalty toward me. It wasn't a crowd yet, but I could feel the tide starting to turn. I thought maybe things might settle down after that. Maybe Karen would realize she was losing her grip. But that night, she went nuclear. I was locking up my garage when I heard the low rumble of engines again. My stomach sank, not because I was afraid, but because I knew what was coming. 2 flatbeds rolled up, carrying not shipping containers this time, but massive concrete barricades. The kind you see blocking off construction zones or military bases. Karen stood beside them, clipboard in hand, directing the drivers. Her plan was obvious: if she couldn't trap me with steel, she'd bury me in cement. One by one, they dropped them across my driveway, my front walk, and even partially onto my lawn. "This is for the safety of the neighborhood," she shouted across the street. "Until further notice, your property is under HOA lockdown." The neighbors were out in force now, watching from every angle. Some filmed. Some shook their heads. Some outright booed her. I didn't argue. I didn't even speak. I just walked inside, picked up my phone, and made the call that was going to end this once and for all. "Tomorrow morning," I told the voice on the other end, "bring the paperwork. All of it. We're going to pay the HOA board a visit they'll never forget." The sun wasn't even fully up when I stepped outside the next morning. The concrete barricade still sat there like a row of tombstones across my driveway. But I didn't even glance at them. I had bigger plans. At exactly 8 a.m., a black SUV rolled up. My lawyer, Anthony, stepped out in a crisp gray suit, followed by a man in khakis carrying a thick leather briefcase, my property surveyor. A third man in jeans and a ball cap climbed out last, holding a large envelope under his arm. That was the lease accountant. Karen must have seen them from her kitchen because within minutes, she emerged from her front door in full battle mode, clipboard in hand, hair perfectly sprayed into place, and an expression that could curdle cream. "You can't have a board meeting without notifying us," she called out as we walked toward the HOA office. I didn't stop walking. "Good thing I'm not having a board meeting," I said over my shoulder. "I'm having an owners' meeting." That one sentence made her pick up her pace until she was practically jogging to keep up. Inside the HOA office, the other board members were already seated, sipping coffee and shuffling papers. Their chatter stopped dead when we walked in. I set the large envelope down in the middle of the table and nodded to Anthony. He began slowly, deliberately. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 2 decades, you have operated this HOA under the belief that your control extended to the land beneath these properties. That belief is incorrect." He opened the envelope and began sliding out documents one by one: lease agreements, land deeds, renewal contracts, all signed, notarized, and pointing to the same conclusion: every square foot of the development sat on land I owned outright. The surveyor placed a large map on the table, the bright boundary lines making it clear that the HOA's jurisdiction existed only in the bylaws they'd written for themselves, not in any legal authority over the ground itself. Karen tried to interrupt, but the accountant spoke over her, tapping the renewal clause in bold print. "This lease is up for renewal in 60 days. The lessor," he glanced at me, "has the right to change terms, increase rates, or refuse renewal entirely." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Board members exchanged nervous glances. One man cleared his throat and muttered something about misunderstanding the arrangement. But I wasn't there for apologies. "You've spent months harassing me over a driveway," I said. "You've tried fines, threats, blockades, and even false police reports. You've embarrassed this neighborhood, and you've used your position to bully people who don't fight back. I leaned forward, resting my palms on the table. That ends today. The less extreme part of what happened next was that I gave them a choice: dissolve the current board and elect a new one with term limits and oversight. Or watch the lease double in price and include clauses that would bankrupt the HOA within a year. The board looked terrified. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. The extreme part came an hour later. While the board was still sitting there in stunned silence, I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Tom, the tow truck driver from before. "Time to clear my driveway," I told him. "And make sure the whole neighborhood sees it." When Tom arrived, he didn't just haul away the concrete barricades. He towed them, one by one, straight to the front of the HOA office and lined them up across the parking lot entrance, trapping Karen's prized Lexus inside. By the time he was done, half the neighborhood had gathered to watch. Some were laughing, some were cheering, and more than a few were filming the whole thing. Karen stood on the sidewalk, shaking with rage, but she didn't say a word. She couldn't, not with all those witnesses and all that paperwork hanging over her head. And I still wasn't done. Karen disappeared for 2 full days after the barricade incident. No HOA notices on doors, no loud phone calls from her porch, no early morning compliance walks. The neighborhood felt like it could breathe for the first time in months. But everyone knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to retreat quietly, she was the type to lick her wounds and come back swinging. I spent those 2 days preparing for exactly that. My lawyer handled the formal notices to the board, the lease accountant finalized the renewal terms, and the surveyor drafted a clean, easy-to-read map of the property boundaries. I was ready to drop the curtain for good. On the 3rd day, the HOA sent out an emergency meeting notice to every resident. It was clear Karen had called it. Probably thought she could rally the neighborhood against me before the lease clock ran out. The meeting hall was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls. People stood in the back. I walked in wearing a plain shirt and jeans, carrying only a single leather folder. No lawyer this time, no entourage, just me. Karen was already at the front, pacing like a prosecutor about to give her opening statement. "Neighbors," she started, her voice loud and rehearsed. "We are under threat. One man, one selfish man, is trying to take control of our community for his own gain. He's using loopholes and intimidation to undo everything we've built here." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people nodded. Others frowned. She was good at stirring emotions, I'll give her that. When she finally paused for breath, I stepped forward. "Mind if I speak?" I asked. "It's not your turn," she snapped. "That's the thing, Karen, it's always my turn. Because this isn't your community." I opened the folder and held up the land deed for everyone to see. "This is my land. Every driveway, every sidewalk, every manicured lawn. 20 years ago, my uncle leased it to the HOA. When he passed, I inherited it. And for 2 decades, I've let this association run things without interference. But in the last 6 months, you," I pointed at her, "have turned it into a circus of fines, harassment, and petty revenge." The surveyor's map went up on the projector behind me, big red lines showing exactly where HOA authority ended and where my ownership began. "This lease renews in 60 days, I continued. "And I've decided it won't be renewed, unless this HOA dissolves, effective immediately. We'll form a new association, one that serves the residents, not controls them. No more arbitrary rules. No more harassment. And definitely no more shipping containers." The room erupted. Half the people started clapping. The other half just looked stunned. Karen tried to shout over the noise. "You can't do that," she barked. "Yes," I said, stepping closer so only she could hear, "I can. And if you push me any further, I'll terminate the lease early. Then every one of your precious HOA rules will be worthless before the ink is dry." Her face went pale. She looked around the room for backup, but the board members wouldn't even meet her eyes. They knew the fight was over. A voice from the back shouted, "Let's vote." The residents raised their hands, overwhelmingly in favor of dissolving the HOA. Within minutes, it was done. Karen was stripped of her title, her authority, and her platform all in one motion. But the wild ending? That came the next morning. At sunrise, Tom's tow truck rolled through the neighborhood one last time. Not carrying barricades or containers, this time it carried a shiny, new welcome sign for the entrance of the development. The letters were big, bold, and impossible to miss. "Welcome to Kingsley Estates, proudly managed by your landlord, James Kingsley." As the sign went up, neighbors came out cheering, some even bringing coffee and donuts to celebrate. Karen? She drove past in her Lexus, sunglasses hiding her eyes, but I could see her jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. She'd tried to wage war on my driveway with steel and concrete. I'd ended up owning her position, her authority, and the loyalty of the whole neighborhood. And from that day forward, the only containers on my property were the ones I rented out, for a tidy profit.